Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. It is the fourth week now coming up for the summer stage for the 2023 season. And it is the final weekend of Eastern Region action before we get to the knockouts next week. So I'll have a nice fun little bracket next week for that. But before we have to get there, we have to get through the final week, week 4. So let's jump in and let's talk about the games happening this weekend. Up first is the Guangzhou Charge taking on the Seoul Dynasty. What an interesting matchup considering where these teams were in the first half of the season. Charge were the last undefeated team in the Eastern region before falling flat in the midseason, or the spring knockouts. Dynasty, one of the weakest teams in the Eastern region in the first half of the season. Now, I think everyone feels better with the Dynasty. They look better. They feel more put together. They feel more confident. I think they look a lot better with the addition of Vindame and EasyHan. I think those two have really come in and helped this roster a lot, as well as allowing the move of Krillin back over to flex support instead of having him on main support. I think the team just looks a lot better than what they are now. They had that lost O2 Blast, which was pretty bad. But in general, I think they're the better team here. I think they should be favored here. So I do have the Dynasty winning this game by a score of 3-0. I just don't feel great about the Charge right now. They did take a map off the Dallas Fuel. They're the first team this tournament cycle, I think. No, Dallas lost another map. But they took a map off Dallas, which is good for them. But in the Dynasty, look really, really good. I think they're going to just get better as we progress. I mentioned it in my recap last week that I think earlier this week, that I think the Dynasty are a scary Dark Horse team, and they have a lot of potential to upset some teams and potentially have a nice run in the Eastern region. And I think we're going to see a nice win from them here over the Guangzhou Charge. Up next is a contenders matchup. We have Pokerface versus Panthera. Not particularly interesting to me. Neither of these teams have looked great. Panthera has a win over the Guangzhou Charge, as well as a win over, I believe, O2 Blast. Yes, of course, O2 Blast was the back cap game. And then Pokerface, their one win, I believe, is over O2 Blast as well. So, somewhat evenly matched teams. They've played similar opposition. I don't really feel great about either of these teams, honestly. I think that Pokerface is winning against Dreamers. That is who they beat. I think Pokerface should be the better team here. I think they have better talent than Panthera does. They have a lot more kind of Overwatch League talent, a lot more recent Overwatch League talent. And I think that they should be favored in this game. But I don't really think this game is that big of a storyline. I don't think there's that much intrigue, honestly, in this one. So I'm going to give it to Pokerface by a score of 3-1. Like I said, I think they're the better team, and they have better players, and they've had a bit of an unfortunate run here. They've had to play a bit of a tougher schedule. But they've also been kind of just getting boomed every time they lose. So they've struggled a lot, but I think they are the better team than Panthera. Maybe Panthera proves me wrong, but I haven't really watched a lot of APAC. I've not watched the contender teams in particular, so it's been tough for these particular types of games. But I don't know. I'll give Pokerface the edge in this one. Up next is the Seoul Infernal taking on the Shanghai Dragons. I think the Infernal are still looking like one of the best teams in the region. Obviously, losing to Dallas last week makes you put Dallas above them for the moment. At least it should. But in terms of the overall stage, they've looked pretty good. Dragons, I think, have improved a lot. I think Fate really has been a huge addition for this team. I think he's really kind of helped solidify what they're able to play and kind of how they are able to kind of play to their strengths now. I think they look a lot better. But I think the Infernal overall just had the higher highs. I don't know what's going on with Poco. He's in Korea now. Maybe they want to actually have Poco play some of those off-tank maps. Maybe they feel like that's a point of weakness for them. Maybe they feel like with the circuit map pick now a thing in the rotation, maybe they feel like they would be in a better spot if they could have someone play some of those off-tank heroes. I don't know if that's the reason why he's here. I honestly have no idea. But we did see these with the team. I don't really think it matters in this game. I think they are the better team. I think they should win this one relatively comfortably. I have them winning at 3-0. I could see it being closer. Like I said, I think Shanghai's improved a lot, and I really do love what they've done with Hisu and Viper. I think both of those players have had great years. Viper really would be a bigger Rookie of the Year candidate if he was on a more successful team. And I think that Hisu has really kind of put himself in a position to, wherever the Overwatch esports scene goes next year, to get himself a nice spot on a pretty good team. I think that his time in Toronto was good, but it kind of hurt his career a bit. I think he's having a bit of a bounce back year, kind of showing that he is still a very good talent, that even on a not great team, he's still kind of popping off and showing up. So I like what they've done, but I just don't think it's enough to get past the Seoul Infernal. Moving over to the Western region, we had an interesting matchup as the Houston Outlaws take on the Toronto Defiant. Arguably, two relatively top teams in the region. I think that the Defiant have looked pretty good, pretty solid. I don't think they are unbelievable. I don't think they're on top of the world, but I think they're good, and I think they've looked good enough for me to think that they can make this one interesting. They took a map off Atlanta when they played that Circuit Royale, that wild circuit. Of course, Houston beat the Atlanta Reign in a very good match from them, so you have to feel decent about both of these teams where they are right now. But I think the Outlaws are the clear-cut favorite. I think they should be the better team here. I think the Defiance additions of Spectra and Opener have been incredibly successful. I think they are leading candidates for best midseason additions. We'll see what happens as we get to the end of the season, but I think they've both been very successful changes that have really elevated this team quite a bit, and I think this team looks a lot better. I think especially with Spectra just being an incredible player, an incredible talent for this team. So I really like what they've done so far. I don't think it's enough to get past Houston, though. I think Houston's just a little too good, little too strong. So I'm going to give Houston the win here by a score of 3-1. I don't know what the maps are. We can't access them anymore, which kind of is annoying. If Circuit's in the map pool, I think that Toronto should win it. I genuinely think Toronto might be the best team in the world at Circuit Royale. They're so good on that map. They beat Boston on it. They beat Atlanta on it. I think it just plays their strength so well. So I think that's a map that they could win if it's in the pool. But I don't know what's in the map pool because we don't have access to it anymore. So I'm going to give Toronto a map just in case. They could also win another map here and there. But I think Houston is the better team, that they'll take the series ultimately. But I don't think it'll necessarily be a one-sided affair. Up next, we have the Los Angeles Gladiators taking on the New York Excelsior. Interesting matchup here. A couple weeks ago, I said that I thought the Gladiators were in a better spot than New York, but as we've seen the last couple of weeks of Gladiators action, especially this most recent week, where they lost to London and Vancouver in dominating fashion. Of course, they lost to Valiant. Gladiators just kind of boomed. I think that they kind of destroyed the thing that really made them what they are. They kind of don't have an identity. They don't really seemingly have anything they're particularly strong at that they can use to compete with anyone else. New York, on the other hand, I think the addition of OG really has helped this team a lot. I think his support play is just overall stronger than what they were getting with Lep and Halo, and I think that has given them a lot more flexibility to let Fitz really be the playmaker and damage when they need him to be, while also continuing to enable Psycho and Shockwave in their hero picks, and not kind of making it where you kind of have to potentially force them in maps so they shouldn't necessarily be in together, where maybe you want Fitz in. And I think Kellen's had a pretty good bounce back year as well. I think that he's able to play quite a bit. So I think in terms of just identity and what we've seen from these teams, I think that you have to give the edge to New York. I think they look better right now. I think they're all in all the more solid team. So I am going to give them the win here by a score of 3-1. I think the Gladiators, this is a very big week for them because they have two games. One against New York, one against Houston. So one of these games is relatively winnable, the other one not really. They also play New York again next week, I think. So it is a very big weekend for them because they have a lot of really good players, and we know that they could do well. Can they bounce back this week? Can this be the week where they really start to get stuff to click? Can they integrate Cal better into the roster? Can they get Marvel working? Can the whole team kind of find their groove? We'll see what happens. So, interesting game, but like I said, I think New York is going to take it this time around. Up next, we have the Vegas Eternal taking on the Vancouver Titans. Sad moment for the Vegas Eternal. Unable to win last week. Verse swept by the LA Valiant. And I think that's probably the last really good chance they would have had to win a match. It just doesn't seem likely at this point. And I think you have to favor the Vancouver Titans in this one. I have a 3-0 here for Vancouver. I don't know if it will be that one-sided. I don't think Vegas in their current form is bad. I really like Knife. I think he's been really good so far for this team, but I just think there's not enough overall. I think there's still so much with the ping and the visa stuff. I just think that the Vegas turn have way too many factors going against them right now that hurt their potential to be a really good team. I don't necessarily think they have what it takes to really challenge the Vancouver Titans, so I think Titans take this one relatively dominantly. I'm going to say a 3-0, like I said. Up next, we have the Seoul Bowl. Seoul in front of our Seoul Dynasty. This is my first big pick game of the weekend. Really like this matchup. It was a very interesting matchup when they played the beginning of the season. They played the first week of the year, and it was a win for the Seoul Dynasty, kind of shockingly, when we all kind of thought the Infernal were the better team potentially. And from there, the team's trajectories were very different. Dynasty went on a massive losing streak. Infernal went on a massive winning streak. So we have these two teams that I think are now in an interesting spot because I think the Dynasty look a lot better. I love the addition of Indame. I love the addition of Easyhon. I think they made the moves they needed to make. They have flexibility now. I think it helps Bellisria look a lot better. If they need Void, they can play Void, but they don't really play him much at this point in time because he's not really a needed player. And I think it's a very, very interesting look for this team as a result. I think the Infernal should be the better team. They are more talented. I think they've looked more consistent so far. But if Prophet keeps playing the way he's playing, I don't think you can write off the Dynasty very easily. So it'll be interesting to see. I think meta-wise, this matchup would be very interesting because I think depending on what you get, if you get a map like Circuit where you can put Void in and you can play Sigma and you just have the better Sigma player, I think that's a pretty big deal. I think that there's certain things that the Dynasty can try to do on maps like that, right? They don't have map pick, so it's not as kind of clear. But I certainly think there's places you can rely on Void and his specialties, or you can rely on, if Prophet can pop off, you can get a lot there. I think that there's a really interesting matchup here. But I do feel like the Infernal are still the stronger team. Yes, they lost to Dallas last weekend, but Dallas looks incredible. They look like one of the best teams in the league right now. And at least they look like the best team in the Eastern region pretty convincingly. So, like I said, I like the Infernal. I think they're good. I think they should be favored here. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a one-sided affair. I think it'll be pretty close if the first matchup is anything to go off of. But I do think the Infernal will get their revenge in a 3-2 victory over the Dynasty. I think it's an interesting matchup. It's one of the ones I have my eyes on the most this week. That's why it's a big pick. I assume, well, I guess if Mag has COVID, maybe it won't be in front of the home crowd. But I would love it to be in front of the home crowd if possible. Because it's always cool to see the Seoul fans come out and support their teams. So maybe we'll get it. I guess it depends on what's going on with Mag. Up next is the Hangzhou Spark taking on the Dallas Fuel. Another very interesting matchup. Two teams that are pretty good. I think Dallas, like I said, looks like the best team in the region right now. The Spark have had their moments. They've looked decent at times, but they've struggled a bit. They lost to the Dynasty a couple weeks ago, which is pretty bad for a team that you think should be able to compete with some of the top teams in the region and even potentially in the league. Right now, I think you have to favor Dallas. I just think they've managed to kind of get everything working. I think Bliss and MCD was one of the bigger problems at the beginning of the year. I think they figured that out quite a bit. I think the Edison Sparkle duo is starting to settle more, especially because I think that they've opened up the ability to play Echo in the meta, and I think that helps a lot with Sparkle. I think Edison was always a good Tracer player, but you just needed him to play the hit scan, which meant you had to kind of have Sparkle learn. But I think when you can run Edison Tracer and Sparkle Echo, you really do open up a lot of opportunities and options for the Fuel. You get a little bit more flexibility and versatility, which is nice to see. And so there's more maps they can kind of excel in ways that are good. And Hanbin has started to look better on the Winston. Not sure if it's a full mechanical improvement or if it's just the support line starting to play better. But I think that overall the Fuel just look like the better team. I think they're going to take this one. I think it could be decently close. I think there's potential for it to be close. But the Fuel have just been so good and the Spark have been so inconsistent that I'm going to say the Fuel 3-0 in this one. We haven't seen them play in a while. So who knows exactly, but I have to favor the Fuel right now after I think they put up a stronger performance so far this stage, and so to me, no-brainer, they take this one. Up next is another contenders game between two relatively low-level teams. This time it's O2 Blast versus Poker Face. O2 Blast obviously has that win against the Seoul Dynasty. Outside of that, they've just looked pretty poor. I mean, last week, that back cap that they gave up against Panthera really kind of summarizes this team. I don't think they have a lot of room they need to improve. They got to grow. They got to change. They got to improve upon. This is a relatively new roster. Poker Face, you got some veterans. You got some people who've been around for a long time. These are the top two teams, ironically, in contenders Korea for the first half of the year. When the spring stage qualifiers went in, they were the top two seeds. They were the top two teams coming out of the contenders brackets for the knockouts. And now they're playing, and I think that right now Poker Face just looks like the better team. I think that they have just way more talent that I trust. So I think they're going to take this one by a score of 3-1. I'll give O2 Blast a map because they have that win over the Dynasty, and so out of respect for that, I'll give them a map, but I don't think either team is particularly great, so I don't really care that much about the results of this one. Up next, we have the Guangzhou Charge versus Dreamers. Very interesting matchup here, because last time these two teams played, it was a win for Dreamers on their way to that second place finish in the knockouts for the spring stage. They were one match away from making it to the midseason madness before they lost ultimately to the Hangzhou Spark. So Dreamers, last time they played, won. Both of these rosters made major changes since then. Dreamers obviously losing Easy Han, losing Spectra, having to kind of rebuild their damage line. It's been pretty successful so far. They also had Donghoon, I believe, on that team, and he is now, of course, with the Washington Justice. Guangzhou Charge, no more Jimmy, no more Piggy. Ooh, almost forgot his name. And now they have Gaga and Jinmu. So it's an interesting change, but I do think that the Dreamers right now look like the better team. I think the Charge just look kind of boomed. They don't really feel that good. They feel like the organization's pretty much given up. So I actually think Dreamers are going to take this one. I don't think there's many options or times when a contenders team just looks to be the better team. But right now, I think they look better than Charge. So give me Dreamers taking this one by a score of 3-1. I want the Charge to be better because I think the Overwatch League teams are the ones you want to see perform better. I think after what happened in the midseason, then they just kind of boomed. I think the organization basically said, all right, we tried, we lost, we give up, do whatever at this point in time. Dreamers, to me, just feel a little bit better, so I'm going to give them the edge in this one. Up next, we have the LA Gladiators taking on the Houston Outlaws. Good game in the midseason, or not in the midseason, the Pro-Am between these two teams. Now, who really cares? Gladiators just don't look very good. Outlaws do. They still look strong. I still think they're one of the best teams in the league. I think they should win this one pretty easily. I think they're just significantly better at this point in time. So, yeah, give me the Outlaws to take this one by a score of 3-0. I think it was a 3-0 when they played in the first half of the season, too. And Glads looked better then than they do now. So, yeah, things are not looking great for the LA Gladiators, while Houston Outlaws still look to be way too dominant. So, I'm taking Houston. Up next, New York Excelsior take on the Washington Justice. An interesting matchup. I think New York is one of the most interesting schedules this week. I think both of their games are fascinating because they're against two teams that are kind of in their area, right? Washington and Gladiators are two teams that were very good in the first half of the season and are now struggling. They made roster moves. Are they working? Are they not working? New York made a pretty significant roster change, bringing in OG in the midseason break, and I think it's been relatively successful. They won their first two games of the stage, but they played London and they played Vegas. How much do you take from those wins? It's tough. London did beat the Gladiators, so there's some of that there. But this, to me, is a really good test week for New York to see where they are. If they can beat the Gladiators and they can beat the Justice, you feel pretty good about where New York is at. If they go 1-1, okay, they're probably about where we thought they were going into the tournament. If they go 0-2, they're probably worse than we thought they were. So it's a very interesting week for them. Justice, I think, also have an interesting week. I think for them, it's a little bit tougher because they have to play New York, and then we'll talk about them having to play Toronto later. But once again, these are teams in kind of that similar area where, depending on the result, we could move them up, we could move them down. we could be surprised with them, or we could say, yep, this team is exactly where we thought they were based on what happens. And, the 1-1, of course, matters differently, too. Like, if New York's 1-1 is they lose to Gladiators and beat Washington, that's way different than if they beat Glads and lose to Washington, right? Like, we think Washington's better than Gladiators, so if that's the result, it makes sense, right? So I think it'll be fascinating to kind of watch this game. I think Washington, I don't know what the status is with Donghoon. I don't know if he's going to be there or not. I have no idea. To me, New York just looks stable, solid. We haven't seen them play in a week. I think oftentimes that helps more than it hurts. Gladiators didn't look great last week, but they also made a roster change, so it kind of plays into that a little bit, potentially. But I like where New York's at. I think they're a pretty solid team. I think that you have to feel better with them than Washington right now, just because Washington, have they won a game yet in the second half of the season? I don't think they have. I think they're winless since we got into the summer stage. So that's pretty bad, to be honest. That's a rough go if you can't find a win anywhere in this tournament cycle. So I'm going to give it to New York. I'm going to say, though, this is a pretty close. I'm going to say it's a 3-2 for them. I think that these two teams are pretty close together. And if the Justice are able to get Donghoon there, I think it'll be another really interesting matchup in that way, because it'll be kind of full strength, which I think was kind of the thing we saw with Vancouver, for example, when Heesang came in for them. They looked better now that he was here. So, it changes things potentially. But I think if he's not there, New York should definitely win. If he is there, it's a bit more of a toss-up. But like I said, I still favor New York to win the series regardless. Up next, let's go to my second big pick game of the week, which is the San Francisco Shock taking on the very Vancouver Titans that we just mentioned. What do you know? Last time these two teams played was in the spring stage knockouts. 3-2 series, banger of a match, went the distance. It was a phenomenal game. San Francisco pulled out the win in the end. Now we go into this next part of their matchup, and we kind of have to ask the question, what's the result this time around? I think that the San Francisco Shock have improved since then. The Titans, it's tough to say if they've gotten better or worse since then. With the addition of Heesang, I think, like I said many times before, lack of hit scan does concern me, but you don't really need it right now. As long as you can play Tracer, Sombra, and Echo, you are pretty much fine in that line. I think my biggest concern with the Shock is that they did some kind of cheesy things versus the Spitfire that just didn't work. If they do stuff like that again, concerning. And I think that they still are trying to get their kind of full roster to work. But I think what we've seen from Luke Mino and Renko and kind of bringing Probe and Striker in has helped this team out quite a bit. They've done some weird things, like they put Max in on support, I think, in one of the games. So they've done some weird, or maybe it was on damage. I don't know. They've done some weird. Or they put Junbin, maybe. I don't know. It was weird. They put Junbin in on damage, I think, and or on support and Max. They still do weird stuff. Krusty does what Krusty does. So I do have some concern, but it feels like the team has kind of lightened up a bit. It feels like they've gotten a little bit more comfortable, and they feel like they certainly are in a better spot than they were, as we looked at them at the first half of the year. I think they're still improving. To me, the Titans have a lot of that glue in place already. They have a lot of that synergy in place already. They don't have to kind of start behind the 8 ball in the same way. So, yes, they add Heesang, and he was on the team before. But I think that they're in a better starting spot than where the Shock are. I think it'll be close. It's going to be a good match, but I am going to go in favor of the Titans by a score of 3-2. I thought the Titans last week had a very good week. I thought it was a very good look from them, being able to bounce back from a rough kind of opening. Dominant win over the Justice, dominant win over the Gladiators. Really kind of put themselves back in that position they need to be in. Like I said, they can play the damage picks right now, so I feel like they're in a good spot to take this series against the San Francisco Shock. Moving on to Sunday, we have the Dallas Fuel taking on Panthera. Weaker team in that Panthera contenders roster. I don't really think they stand much of a chance against the Dallas Fuel, who I think right now do remain one of the best teams in the league. Certainly the best team right now in the East. So I think they'll take this one in a very dominating 3-0 fashion. I just don't see Panthera taking this one. They shouldn't take it. They're not as good as the Dallas Fuel in any capacity. So give me the Fuel let's move on. Next game is the Hangzhou Spark taking on Dreamers. I think this is an interesting one. I think that this is a potentially upset alert for the Hangzhou Spark. I think potentially they could drop this series. I don't think it's likely, but it could happen. Last time these teams played was in the spring stage knockouts finals for bracket A. Hangzhou Spark won that one in a dominant fashion. I think it'll be much the same way. I think the Dreamers' losses are something that will play an impact, and I think the Spark, even though they've looked a little mixed at times, I still think they're in a better spot than Dreamers is. So I think the Spark should be pretty heavily favored in this one. I think they'll take this one by a score of 3-1. Not a full sweep. I wouldn't be surprised if they clean sweep them. I like what I've seen enough from Dreamers to give them a map. But I think the Spark should win with relative ease. Maybe they do a little trolling and that's how they drop a map. But yeah, I think the Spark right now are the definite favorite in that one. Up next, we have the Shanghai Dragons O2 Blast rematch from when they... Actually, did they play in the first half of the year? I thought they played, but I definitely don't think they did, actually, now that I think about it. O2 Blast, first half of the year, much better than they are now. Shanghai, first half of the year, much worse than they are now. Shanghai looks a lot better. I think Shanghai should win this one. I think they're the best team right now. Potentially kind of outside of the kind of top three in the Eastern region. I think a lot of people think Fuel, Infernal, Spark are top three. Then you kind of have a bit of a gap, potentially. You know, Dynasty, Dragons, which of them is the best? I think, personally, the Dynasty have been a little better, but I think the Dragons are still a very solid team, is still a very solid roster that I feel pretty good about, all things considered. So I think Dragons should win this one relatively easy. I'm going to say it is a 3-0 win for them as they get a win over a, in my opinion, inferior O2 Blast roster. Moving on to the Western region, we have the Toronto Defiant taking on the Washington Justice. Interesting game, like I mentioned before. I think Toronto's in the better spot. I think if Washington loses to New York, they should definitely be losing to the Toronto Defiant. I think the Defiant right now are in a better spot. I do think that, obviously, the last time we saw Toronto and New York play, New York won, but that was kind of the old Toronto. It's not a perfect kind of science. I think since the second half of the season, I think the Defiant have just gotten so much better, especially with the way the map pool has changed. I think the fact that they can open up to play some less Winston-based comps helps them a lot. So I think they should be able to win this one. I think they look better right now. So give me the Defiant 3-0 over the Justice. Maybe a bit of a hot take that it's that dominant, but I really just like what I've seen out of Toronto so far. I think they continue to get better and better, so I think they're going to take this one. Final match of the weekend is the Vegas Eternal taking on the San Francisco Shock. The Luke Mino Rack Attack game. Luke Mino revenge game. He wants to beat Vegas, I'm sure. I'm sure Luke Mino wants nothing more than to see that org lose, though I'm sure he feels bad for Rack Attack because I know they're friends. I don't think Vegas wins this one. I feel bad for them because I think that they did a lot to improve with the players on the roster. You feel for Rack Attack because he's been there since the rebuild and just has had nothing happen and nothing go his way. While Luke Mino leaves and goes to San Francisco, and immediately San Francisco starts finding some success. It is unfortunate, it's sad, but I do think Shock take this one in a pretty one-sided 3-0. I feel like at this point in time, it is a little ridiculous to feel that bad about the Vegas Eternal. I don't think they're that bad of a team. But to me right now, you just have to favor the Shock in this one. So there you go. That is all my picks for this week. Lots of games, though one less than usual, which is nice. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on any of these matches. If you agree with me, disagree, whatever it is, I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. And if you liked this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing, as your support does help out a lot with the channel. That's going to be all from me for today. Hope you are all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.